10. The Log Cabin. Legend was real. Many politicians claim humble beginnings, but Lincoln truly started at the bottom. Born on February 12, 1809, in a tiny log cabin on the Kentucky frontier, his world was one of mud, smoke, and endless work. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, were poor farmers, moving constantly to escape debt and bad soil. The cabin where Lincoln first drew breath was barely big enough for a bed and a fire. In winter, wind sliced through the cracks. In summer, snakes slithered across the dirt floor. Yet, amid all this hardship, Lincoln developed an obsession that set him apart: reading. He had less than 1 year of formal schooling, but his curiosity was endless. With no books of his own, he borrowed from neighbors, reading the Bible, Aesop's Fables, and Robinson Crusoe by firelight until his eyes hurt. His stepmother, Sarah Bush Lincoln, once said, "He read everything he could lay his hands on." But it wasn't just knowledge he was chasing, it was escape. The more he read, the more he realized the world was bigger than his family's small plot of land. His favorite phrase, written years later, perfectly captured that hunger. "The things I want to know are in books. My best friend is the man who'll get me a book I ain't read." Lincoln's early life was marked by loss. His mother died when he was 9. His sister followed years later, and his family kept moving westward from Kentucky to Indiana, then Illinois. He grew up watching death, toil, and disappointment, yet somehow it made him gentle instead of bitter. When you read his later speeches, filled with compassion and melancholy, you can almost hear the echo of that lonely boy in the woods, dreaming of something better. That log cabin was more than a home. It was his crucible. The wilderness taught him independence, endurance, and empathy. It stripped away arrogance, leaving a man who knew how to listen to people from every walk of life, a rare skill that would later save a divided nation. For 9. Lincoln failed his way to the top. Before Abraham Lincoln became a symbol of success, he was practically the poster child for failure. His life looked like one long losing streak, except he never quit. At 22, he started a small general store with a friend in New Salem, Illinois. The business collapsed, and Lincoln was left in debt for years. Locals nicknamed it the national debt. Instead of declaring bankruptcy, he slowly repaid every dollar, a decision that would earn him the nickname Honest Abe. Then came politics. His first run for the Illinois state legislature in 1832, he lost. His next attempt, he won, but it was far from the start of an easy career. He later lost bids for Congress, for the Senate, twice, and even for the vice presidency. Each defeat could have ended his ambitions. Instead, he treated failure like training. During this time, he built his reputation as a lawyer. Self-taught and armed with little more than a borrowed copy of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, he became known for his sharp logic and plain speech. He didn't try to out-talk opponents. He out-thought them. His honesty, humor, and clarity made him popular in Illinois courts. One rival once admitted, when Lincoln spoke, juries leaned forward. By the 1850s, Lincoln's political career seemed finished. Then came slavery, the issue that would define his life. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed new territories to choose whether to allow slavery, enraged him. In speech after speech, Lincoln warned that a house divided against itself cannot stand. He lost the 1858 Senate race to Stephen Douglas, but gained something far more valuable: national attention. 2 years later, in 1860, the same unknown lawyer from Illinois became the 16th President of the United States. But his victory didn't bring peace. It brought war. 11 southern states seceded before he even took office. As he left his home in Springfield, Lincoln told his neighbors, "I now leave, not knowing when or whether ever I may return." It wasn't a farewell speech. It was a prophecy. What followed would test every inch of his character, and every lesson he learned from failure, because Abraham Lincoln wasn't built by luck or privilege. He was forged by loss, rejection, and the kind of endurance only a man who'd split wood in the cold could understand. When historians call him self-made, they don't mean rich, they mean indestructible. 8. Lincoln's love life was tragic and complicated. Abraham Lincoln's path to love was as stormy as his path to power. Beneath the calm, stoic exterior was a man tormented by insecurity, heartbreak, and deep melancholy. His first great love was Anne Rutledge, the daughter of a New Salem tavern owner. Lincoln met her while boarding at her family's inn, and by all accounts she was everything he wasn't: graceful, educated, and warm. Locals recalled seeing them sitting under an oak tree by the Sangamon River, laughing and talking for hours. For the first time, the awkward, bookish lawyer looked genuinely happy. But fate was cruel. In 1835, Anne fell ill with typhoid fever and died at just 22. Lincoln was devastated. Friends said he couldn't eat or sleep, wandering aimlessly through the fields. One neighbor claimed he was so distraught that friends feared he might take his own life. It was during this period that Lincoln's lifelong struggle with what we'd now call depression began. He called it the hypos, short for hypochondria, but everyone around him knew it was something darker. Years later, Lincoln met Mary Todd, a lively and intelligent woman from a wealthy Kentucky family. She was ambitious, witty, and politically astute, a perfect match for a man on the rise, yet their marriage was turbulent from the start. They broke off their engagement once before marrying in 1842, and even after that their relationship was often strained. Mary's temper and Lincoln's long absences created tension that outsiders loved to gossip about. But despite their clashes, their bond was deep. They shared the pain of losing children. 4 sons and only one lived to adulthood. The death of their son, Willie, during Lincoln's presidency nearly broke them both. Still, Lincoln never abandoned Mary. In private letters, he called her Mother, a 19th-century term of affection, and often tried to shield her from Washington's vicious political world. Their marriage, with all its flaws, mirrored the man himself: complicated, human, and full of contradictions. For a president known for saving a divided nation, Lincoln's home life was a battlefield of its own, but one he never turned his back on. Lincoln once said, "Marriage is neither heaven nor hell. It is simply purgatory." Perhaps he meant it as a joke, but behind the humor was a lifetime of love, grief, and endurance. Number 7. Lincoln nearly died before becoming president. Long before the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln came frighteningly close to death, more than once. His life seemed marked by brushes with mortality that made him eerily aware of his own fate. In 1838, when he was a young lawyer in Springfield, a furious political opponent challenged him to a duel. The man, James Shields, took offense to an anonymous letter mocking him in a local paper, a letter written by none other than Lincoln Hughes' fiancée, Mary Todd, with Lincoln's help. Shields demanded satisfaction on the field of honor. As the challenged party, Lincoln got to choose the weapons. Ever the strategist, he picked broadswords instead of pistols, knowing his 6'4" frame and long arms gave him a clear advantage. The two men met on an island in the Mississippi River, ready to fight to the death. Fortunately, mutual friends intervened before the duel began, and the matter was settled peacefully. Still, that incident showed how close Lincoln came to dying, not from war or politics, but pride. Then there were the assassination attempts before the one that succeeded. Just days before his 1861 inauguration, authorities uncovered a plot to kill him during his train journey to Washington. The so-called Baltimore plot was real enough that Detective Alan Pinkerton disguised Lincoln and smuggled him through the city at night. He wore a soft hat instead of his trademark stovepipe one and hid under a shawl to avoid recognition. When news leaked that he'd snuck into Washington like a thief in the night, critics mocked him as a coward. But Lincoln knew better. The Republic was already on the edge of war, and he couldn't afford to die before the battle began. Even during his presidency, death lingered near. He worked under constant threat from Confederate sympathizers, spies, and fanatics. Yet, rather than showing fear, Lincoln developed a kind of grim acceptance. He often spoke about dreams of his own death, once telling his bodyguard about a vision in which he saw himself lying in state at the White House. When his guard begged him to stop talking like that, Lincoln just smiled sadly. "If it's to be so," he said, "it's best to be ready." That quiet courage defined him. Every time death brushed past, he seemed to grow calmer, as if each escape prepared him for the final one at Ford's Theater. Lincoln's sense of destiny wasn't arrogance, it was resignation. He once said, "I do not think I shall live to see the end of this struggle, but someone must see it through." In the end, he was right, but not before reshaping the soul of the nation forever. 6. Lincoln secretly mastered the art of humor and storytelling. When people picture Abraham Lincoln, they imagine a somber man with deep eyes and grave speeches about liberty, but those who actually met him often remembered something else first: his sense of humor. Lincoln was, quite simply, one of the best storytellers in American political history. He used jokes the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, to cut tension, disarm enemies, and connect with ordinary people. When his advisors bickered, he'd calm them with an anecdote. When reporters pressed him, he'd dodge with a clever story. One journalist wrote, "Lincoln could make you laugh when you least expected it, even when you didn't want to." His favorite tales came from his years riding the legal circuit through rural Illinois. Picture him in a small tavern, his long legs stretched out, lawyers gathered around the fire as he tells a story so vivid that even the bartender forgets to pour drinks. He'd mimic voices, slap his knee, and deliver the punchline with perfect timing. But Lincoln's humor wasn't just for entertainment. It was survival. His life was filled with grief and loss, and laughter was his shield. One of his secretaries, John Hay, said, "His stories were his safety valve. He told them that he might not weep." He used that same gift on the grandest stage, politics. When critics accused him of being too lenient with the South, he once replied, "If I were two-faced, would I be wearing this one?" His audience roared with laughter, but his message was clear. He wouldn't play politics with human lives. Even in the darkest days of the Civil War, he found humor in small things. When his generals delayed battle, Lincoln once said dryly, "If General McClellan does not want to use the army, I would like to borrow it for a while." That single line captured his frustration and wit better than any formal rebuke could. And yet there was always depth behind the jokes. His humor made him human, not a distant leader, but a man who understood the absurdity of life. In an age when politics was dominated by loud orators and angry men, Lincoln stood out because he could make you laugh, think, and reflect, all in the same breath. The world remembers him as a martyr, but maybe his truest gift was reminding a broken nation that even in tragedy, there's room for laughter. 5. Lincoln was a technological pioneer. Abraham Lincoln might have lived in the 1800s, but his mind was pure modern. He was the first American president to fully embrace technology, and even became the only U.S. president in history to hold a patent. Yes, you heard that right. Lincoln was an inventor. His patent, filed in 1849, described a device to lift boats over sandbars and shallow waters, a serious problem on the western rivers where he once worked as a ferryman. The model he built himself still sits in the Smithsonian today. Though the invention was never manufactured, it revealed Lincoln's engineering mindset: creative, practical, and always thinking about how to solve real problems. As president, he carried that same curiosity into the White House. When the telegraph became America's newest form of instant communication, Lincoln saw its potential immediately. While many politicians still sent letters by courier, Lincoln set up a telegraph office right inside the War Department. He'd often walk over late at night, barefoot and in his nightshirt, to read the latest battlefield reports firsthand. One officer remembered, he would sit for hours, waiting for the click of the key, reading each message as if it were a letter from the front line. The telegraph allowed Lincoln to do something no leader before him had done: command a war in real time. He could send orders directly to generals, ask questions, and respond within minutes. It gave him a kind of invisible presence across the entire country. In many ways, he became America's first wired president. But Lincoln's fascination with technology went beyond war. He supported the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, linking the Atlantic and Pacific coasts for the first time. He also promoted the creation of the National Academy of Sciences and the expansion of patent law, understanding that innovation was the key to America's future prosperity. What makes this so remarkable is that Lincoln had almost no formal education, yet he grasped the power of invention better than most of his contemporaries. He once said, "The patent system added the fuel of interest to the fire of genius." That phrase, poetic yet practical, perfectly captured his vision of progress, that freedom and innovation go hand in hand. In an era defined by muskets and horses, Lincoln dreamed in railroads and telegraphs. His leadership wasn't just moral or political, it was visionary. And it's no coincidence that during his presidency, America began to transform from a rural frontier into an industrial powerhouse. So while history remembers Lincoln as the man who freed the slaves, he was also the man who looked ahead, who saw that the future would belong not just to soldiers and politicians, but to inventors, thinkers, and dreamers. Therefore, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was a political gamble. When people think of Abraham Lincoln, they think of one thing above all: the Emancipation Proclamation. It's often remembered as the moment he freed the slaves, but few realize how risky, complicated, and even controversial that decision truly was at the time. By 1862, the Civil War was tearing the nation apart. The Union Army had suffered humiliating defeats, public morale was collapsing, and foreign powers like Britain were considering recognizing the Confederacy. Lincoln knew he needed a bold move, something that would transform the war from a political conflict into a moral crusade. Yet he was cautious. Though personally opposed to slavery, Lincoln believed his constitutional duty as president was to save the Union first. "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it," he once wrote. "And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it." Behind that careful language, however, he was already planning something radical. He realized that ending slavery would not only cripple the Confederacy's economy, which relied on enslaved labor, but also give the Union's cause a moral strength that no enemy could match. So, in the summer of 1862, Lincoln drafted the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. His cabinet was shocked. Secretary of State William Seward warned him not to issue it after military defeats, saying it would look like the last measure of an exhausted government. Lincoln agreed and waited for a Union victory. That victory came at Antietam in September, the bloodiest single day in American history. Though technically a draw, Lincoln declared it a win and made his move. On January 1, 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves in the rebellious states. The response was seismic. Abolitionists rejoiced, enslaved people across the South fled to Union lines, and foreign governments backed away from the Confederacy. Yet not everyone was pleased. Some Northerners feared it would prolong the war. Others said Lincoln had overstepped his authority. Even many soldiers admitted they enlisted to save the Union, not to fight for abolition. Still, Lincoln stood firm. He later said, "If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." It was a turning point not only for the war, but for humanity. While the Emancipation Proclamation didn't end slavery everywhere, that would come with the 13th Amendment, it changed the purpose of the war and redefined the nation's moral identity. By transforming the Union's fight into one for freedom, Lincoln didn't just win a war, he changed the meaning of America itself. Number 3. Lincoln's battle with mental health shaped his leadership. Abraham Lincoln's genius came with a heavy price, a lifetime battle with deep, crushing depression. Long before psychiatrists had a name for it, Lincoln called his sadness the black dog that followed him everywhere, and unlike most public figures of his era, he never tried to hide it. From his 20s onward, friends often described him as melancholy. He'd sit for hours in silence, lost in thought, his face unreadable. One friend recalled finding him staring out a window muttering, "I'm the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth." Those weren't poetic exaggerations. They were the words of a man who lived daily with despair. His melancholy grew worse after personal tragedies. The death of Anne Rutledge, his first love, nearly broke him. Later, when his son Eddie died of illness, Lincoln was inconsolable. Then came the death of his son Willie in the White House at just 11 years old. Mary Todd Lincoln suffered a mental breakdown, and Lincoln buried himself in work, quietly weeping behind closed doors. Yet out of this pain came his greatest strength, empathy. His suffering gave him a rare ability to understand others' grief. When he wrote letters to families of fallen soldiers, they weren't political gestures. They were sincere expressions of shared sorrow. One of his most famous letters, to a mother who lost 5 sons in the war, remains one of the most compassionate ever written by a world leader. Lincoln's depression also gave him perspective. While other politicians panicked under pressure, he stayed calm, aware that no crisis could compare to the storms inside his own heart. Aide John Nicolay once said, "He was sad, but never weak." In many ways, Lincoln's leadership was born from that struggle. His melancholy didn't destroy him. It refined him. It gave him patience when others lost hope, and gentleness when others demanded revenge. When generals and congressmen raged, Lincoln reminded them, "We must not be enemies." Those words, spoken in his inaugural address, carried the quiet authority of a man who had already made peace with his own demons. Even his humor was part of the cure. He joked not because he was carefree, but because laughter was his medicine. "I laugh because I must not cry," he once said. That single sentence reveals more about him than any monument ever could. Abraham Lincoln didn't conquer depression. He learned to walk with it. And in doing so, he became a leader not of anger or ego, but of endurance and grace. 2. Lincoln's assassination was planned. Like a stage play, on the night of April 14, 1865, as the Civil War was drawing to a close, Abraham Lincoln finally allowed himself to breathe. Richmond had fallen, Robert E. Lee had surrendered, and peace, after 4 bloody years, was finally within reach. Lincoln spent the day in good spirits, laughing with his wife Mary and even inviting friends to join them at the theater that evening. "There's no place I enjoy more," he said. The play was Our American Cousin, a light-hearted comedy at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. What Lincoln didn't know was that, just a few streets away, actor John Wilkes Booth, one of the most famous stage performers of his day, was putting the final touches on a plan that would shock the world. Booth was a Confederate sympathizer, furious about the South's defeat and obsessed with revenge. Along with a small group of conspirators, he plotted not only to kill Lincoln, but also Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William Seward, hoping to plunge the Union back into chaos. Booth's plan was chillingly theatrical. He knew the theater inside and out. Every corridor, every shadowed staircase. He also knew Lincoln's habits. The president rarely traveled with a heavy guard and loved greeting the public. That night, Booth entered Ford's Theater unchallenged, making his way to the presidential box armed with a single-shot Derringer pistol and a hunting knife. At 10:15 p.m., as the audience erupted in laughter at the line, "You sock-dologizing old man trap," Booth stepped forward, aimed at the back of Lincoln's head, and fired. Lincoln slumped forward silently. Mary screamed. Booth leaped from the balcony onto the stage, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis," Latin for "thus always to tyrants," the motto of Virginia. He landed awkwardly, breaking his leg, but escaped on horseback into the darkness. Lincoln was carried across the street to the Peterson boarding house where doctors worked through the night. At 7:22 a.m. the next morning, he took his final breath. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton whispered, "Now he belongs to the ages." The assassination stunned the nation. Bells tolled, cities fell silent, and crowds wept openly in the streets. Ironically, Booth's act of vengeance achieved the opposite of what he intended. Lincoln became immortal. In death, the man who had divided a country now united it in grief. The funeral procession that followed stretched for over 1,000 miles, from Washington to Springfield, Illinois. Millions lined the tracks as his coffin passed, flowers covering the rails, people kneeling beside the train. For a nation that had just survived civil war, Lincoln's death felt like the closing of an era, the final sacrifice of a man who had already given everything. Number 1. Lincoln's legacy still shapes modern America. More than 160 years after his death, Abraham Lincoln's shadow still stretches across the United States. His words are carved in marble, quoted by presidents and studied by scholars. But his true legacy isn't just in monuments. It is in the ideals that continue to guide the nation. Lincoln believed in what he called a government of the people, by the people, for the people. That idea, simple yet revolutionary, redefined democracy itself. Before Lincoln, America was a country struggling to live up to its promise. After him, it had a purpose: liberty and equality for all. His leadership through the Civil War preserved not just the Union, but the belief that freedom could survive even its darkest test. He also reimagined what power could look like. Lincoln didn't rule through fear or wealth, but through moral conviction. He listened more than he spoke, forgave more than he punished, and saw humanity even in his enemies. When the war ended and others demanded vengeance against the South, Lincoln's only wish was reconciliation. "With malice toward none, with charity for all," he said in his second inaugural address, a sentence that remains one of the most powerful expressions of grace in history. His influence goes far beyond politics. The idea of the self-made man, someone who rises from poverty through hard work and integrity, was embodied by Lincoln. Generations of Americans, from factory workers to presidents, have looked to his life as proof that character matters more than birth. Even today, leaders around the world study Lincoln not just for what he accomplished, but for how he endured. Yet his story isn't perfect, and that's part of why it endures. Lincoln was not a saint. He was human. He failed, doubted, grieved, and suffered. But he never stopped trying to do what he thought was right, even when the cost was unbearable. He showed that greatness isn't about never falling. It's about standing up again, every single time. As one of his contemporaries once said, Lincoln was not the best man in America. He was the best man for America. His leadership transformed the nation, his compassion healed it, and his words still remind us what it means to be truly free. So, when you walk past the Lincoln Memorial, remember that it's not just a monument to one man. It is a mirror reflecting what America could be, if it remembers the lessons of the man who came from a log cabin, read by firelight, and changed the world. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with anyone who loves history and great stories. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another fascinating dive into the past. And if you want to support the channel directly, hit Join for exclusive perks or tap Super Thanks below. Every bit helps us bring history to life. See you in the next video.